Morning on the sidelines of China's annual parliamentary session, the country's foreign minister criticized the U.S. tariffs.
To 20%, and immediately we've seen some of these countries retaliate with tariffs of their own. China, for example, retaliated by announcing 15% tariffs on chicken, wheat, corn, and cotton imports from the United States.
The announcement by the newly elected leader set a turbulent stage as stern warnings and aggressive policies began to reshape the landscape of international commerce. The decision to impose new tariffs on one of the nation's cornerstone industries was both unexpected and strategically bold, generating a ripple of uncertainty that quickly spread across financial markets and industrial sectors. The declaration carried the weight of a vision to challenge long-standing global trade practices, and it was clear that the effects would not be confined within domestic borders. The move was not just a policy adjustment. It was a deliberate pivot that forced industries to reevaluate supply chains, pricing structures, and the very foundations of competitiveness in an increasingly interconnected world. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. In response to these measures, a formidable and calculated counteroffensive emerged. The countermove, orchestrated by an economic powerhouse on the other side of the Pacific, was designed to directly target a linchpin of the targeted nation's industrial might. This was not a mere symbolic gesture, but a full-scale operation aimed at exploiting the vulnerabilities inherent in a sector that had grown dependent on an intricate web of international relationships and just-in-time manufacturing practices. The striking response was as bold as it was unprecedented, reflecting a mindset that was unafraid to confront economic might with equally forceful retaliation. The announcement that set this chain reaction in motion came at a time when the political rhetoric surrounding international trade was charged with passion and uncertainty. The leader's declaration underscored an intent to challenge the status quo, to reconfigure a global economy that many believed had left certain domestic industries overly exposed to foreign competition. This was a moment in which political ambition and economic pragmatism converged, creating a volatile blend that threatened to disrupt not only established trade flows, but also the confidence of investors and workers who had come to rely on the stability of long-standing industrial partnerships. The targeted industry, long celebrated as a symbol of innovation and American manufacturing prowess, found itself under intense scrutiny. The tariffs imposed were not just numbers on a balance sheet, they were a clear signal that trade relations could no longer be taken for granted. The auto industry, with its sprawling network of suppliers and sub-suppliers, was particularly vulnerable to shocks in international relations. Its success had been built on decades of integration with global partners, and the introduction of these tariffs threatened to upend a system that was finely tuned to balance cost, quality, and efficiency. Every link in the supply chain was at risk, from the steel mills and electronics manufacturers to the assembly lines where vehicles were transformed into symbols of national pride. China's counterstrike was executed with a precision that left little room for misinterpretation. The response was not merely reactive, but strategically designed to send a clear message. Any unilateral attempt to reshape global trade rules would be met with swift and decisive action. The countermeasures focused on disrupting the flow of critical components, leveraging China's position as a key supplier of advanced technology and raw materials that were essential to the production of automobiles. By targeting these vital inputs, the counteroffensive aimed to choke off the lifeblood of an industry that had, until that moment, enjoyed an almost inviolable position in the national economy. Economic interdependencies, which had once been a source of strength and mutual benefit, now revealed themselves to be potential liabilities in an environment of escalating trade tensions. The auto industry, with its complex network of parts and components, was suddenly at risk of disintegration. Manufacturers were forced to confront the possibility that a shift in policy in one part of the world could have immediate and profound effects on production capabilities thousands of miles away. The new tariffs had introduced a level of unpredictability that undermined the careful balance of cost efficiency and innovation that had long been the hallmark of the industry. This fragility became all too apparent as the counterstrike took shape, with each new measure tightening the economic noose around a system that had once seemed invulnerable. The decision to target the auto industry was not arbitrary. It was a calculated move, one that reflected a deep understanding of the sector's strategic importance. Automobiles were not merely products. They were a symbol of national identity, a measure of industrial might, and a cornerstone of economic progress. Disrupting this industry was a way to make a statement that reverberated far beyond the confines of factory floors and assembly lines. It was a signal to all players in the global economy that traditional rules were being rewritten, that the established order was being challenged by forces willing to leverage economic power to achieve geopolitical objectives. This dynamic created an atmosphere of intense competition and strategic maneuvering. Both sides were now locked in a high-stakes game of economic chess, with each move carrying significant implications for national security, industrial capacity, and global influence. The timing of the events was critical. The tariffs, introduced at a moment of political transition, were part of a broader narrative of national rejuvenation and economic self-determination. They were intended to shore up domestic industries, to reassert control over key sectors, and to signal that the nation was prepared to defend its interest in an era of rapid globalization. Yet, this same policy thrust exposed underlying vulnerabilities that could be exploited by adversaries with the willingness and capability to retaliate. The countermeasures taken in response to the tariffs were not limited to the realm of trade policy. They resonated on multiple levels, impacting everything from industrial logistics to consumer sentiment. The decision to target a vital industry was a stark reminder that in today's globalized economy, no nation is entirely self-sufficient. The intricate tapestry of supply chains meant that every country was interconnected, with the actions of one inevitably rippling outward to affect many. This interdependence, once celebrated as a testament to global cooperation and economic integration, was now being reframed as a potential weakness in an era of heightened geopolitical rivalry. The strategic implications of this move were profound. The auto industry was a critical sector that had long benefited from decades of innovation, strategic planning, and cross-border collaboration. Its success was built on a delicate equilibrium of production efficiency, technological advancement, and a market that spanned continents. By targeting this industry, the counteroffensive was not just attacking a single economic sector. It was challenging the very foundations of a system that had allowed unprecedented levels of industrial growth and technological progress. The message was clear. Economic might is as much about strategic positioning as it is about raw production capacity. Every policy decision, every tariff, carried with it the potential to reshape the competitive landscape in ways that were both immediate and far-reaching. At the heart of the matter was a stark realization that the global economy was undergoing a transformation. The rules of engagement were shifting, and the old certainties were giving way to a new era defined by rapid change and relentless competition. The tariffs, introduced as a tool of economic policy, had unwittingly unleashed a chain reaction that underscored the importance of adaptability and resilience in the face of uncertainty. For decades, the auto industry had operated under the assumption that international trade agreements and long-established supply chains would remain stable. Now, that assumption was being forcefully questioned, and industry leaders were forced to confront the reality that change was inevitable. Every facet of the Counterstrike was meticulously designed to exploit existing dependencies and to magnify the impact of the new policies. The focus was on the interconnected nature of modern manufacturing, where a single disruption in the supply of specialized components could halt production across an entire network of factories. The countermeasures were calibrated to target these choke points, ensuring that the disruption would be both immediate and extensive. The response was emblematic of a broader strategy that sought not only to retaliate, but to fundamentally reshape the dynamics of power in the global marketplace. It was an assertion of economic strength, a demonstration that the machinery of industry was capable of being redirected in service of national interests. The implications of this development were multifaceted and complex. At a time when economic indicators were already showing signs of volatility, the sudden eruption of tensions in the auto sector added a new dimension to the challenges facing policymakers and industry leaders alike. The intricate balance between national security and economic prosperity had always been delicate, but the latest developments underscored just how vulnerable that equilibrium could be. The targeted actions were designed to force a reckoning, a recognition that in an era of economic interdependence, The traditional measures of power and influence were no longer sufficient. The counterstrike was a bold assertion that the age-old adage of might making right was not confined to the realm of military power. It extended into the very heart of economic strategy. The decision to leverage economic tools as a means of influencing global affairs was a testament to the evolving nature of international relations. The traditional paradigms of conflict, which once relied heavily on military might and territorial conquest, were giving way to a new form of engagement where economic leverage was the primary currency of power. The actions taken in response to the tariffs were emblematic of this shift, representing a move towards a model of confrontation that was as much about controlling trade flows and supply chains as it was about traditional notions of sovereignty and territorial integrity. The targeted measures were a reminder that in today's world, economic policies were potent instruments of national strategy, capable of producing consequences that were both immediate and profound. In a broader sense, the unfolding events reflected the inherent risks of an economic system built on mutual dependencies. The complex network of trade relationships that had once been celebrated for fostering global prosperity now revealed its potential to become a battleground for competing interests. The strategic vulnerabilities that had been hidden beneath the surface were now exposed in stark relief, prompting a reassessment of the assumptions that had long underpinned the global order. The counterstrike was a wake-up call, a demonstration that the rapid pace of change in international relations required constant vigilance and an unwavering commitment to protecting national interests. It served as a powerful reminder that economic power, when wielded with precision, could be as disruptive as any conventional weapon. The immediate implications of this move resonated across a spectrum of stakeholders. Industry leaders who had long relied on a stable environment to drive innovation and growth were suddenly confronted with a reality where the rules of engagement were being rewritten. The very fabric of production, which had been woven with threads of international cooperation and mutual benefit, was now fraying at the edges. The decision to impose tariffs on such a critical sector had sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in boardrooms, where executives and policymakers grappled with the daunting prospect of reconfiguring entire business models. The counterstrike, in its precision and scope, was a stark illustration of the risks inherent in an economy where strategic vulnerabilities could be exploited with little warning. For those who had placed their faith in the stability of global trade agreements, the recent developments served as a jarring reminder that change could be swift and unrelenting. The narrative of economic progress, long built on the promise of free trade and open markets, was now intersecting with a more assertive and pragmatic approach to international relations. The targeted actions underscored a reality in which economic policy was a battlefield, where every decision carried the potential to alter the course of entire industries. The measures taken by the counteroffensive were a clear signal that the era of unchallenged globalization was drawing to a close, and that the emerging order would be defined by a new set of rules, one in which economic might and strategic agility were paramount. The ripple effects of this confrontation were evident in the heightened sense of urgency that permeated discussions in economic circles. Analysts and experts were compelled to re-examine long-held assumptions about the resilience of supply chains and the capacity of industries to absorb sudden shocks. The discussion was no longer confined to abstract debates about policy, but had taken on a tangible quality that touched the lives of workers, investors, and consumers alike. The intricacies of international trade, once considered an abstract exercise in economic theory, had been thrust into the limelight as a matter of national survival. Every decision, every policy shift was now being scrutinized for its potential to either stabilize or destabilize an ecosystem that was already under considerable strain. The unfolding situation underscored a fundamental truth about the modern economy. The tools of trade are potent instruments of statecraft. The decision to launch a counterstrike was not merely a defensive maneuver, it was a strategic assertion of power. The action was measured and deliberate, designed to counterbalance a move that many viewed as aggressive and destabilizing. In the context of a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape, the ability to recalibrate economic policy on the fly was emerging as a critical asset. The countermeasures, which targeted a vital sector with surgical precision, were emblematic of a broader trend in which economic leverage was increasingly being used as a means of achieving political objectives. The interplay of politics and economics was laid bare in this confrontation. At its core, the situation represented a clash of ideologies and strategic visions. On one side, there was a force determined to assert national sovereignty through robust, uncompromising measures that prioritized domestic interests above all else. On the other, there was an equally determined entity prepared to defend its economic interests by any means necessary, even if it meant disrupting the conventional order of international trade. This dynamic was a vivid illustration of the complex interdependencies that defined modern global commerce, where the actions of one nation could set in motion a series of responses that reverberated far beyond its borders. The decision to deploy economic instruments as a means of countering policy moves was both daring and innovative. It represented a departure from traditional responses, which often relied on diplomatic negotiations or incremental adjustments. Instead, the approach was characterized by its immediacy and its willingness to leverage every available asset in the economic arsenal. The counteroffensive was a demonstration of the power inherent in a system where production and supply chains were inextricably linked. By targeting key components and exploiting the vulnerabilities of a tightly woven network, the response was able to inflict damage that was both significant and difficult to reverse. The strategic calculus was clear. In a world where economic power was synonymous with national strength, the ability to disrupt a major industry could serve as a potent deterrent against future challenges. This development also prompted a reevaluation of long-standing assumptions about the sanctity of established trade routes and production methodologies. The intricate dance of commerce that had for decades facilitated unprecedented levels of growth was now facing a reckoning. The carefully balanced interplay of tariffs, supply chain logistics, and consumer demand was suddenly thrown into disarray, compelling policymakers and industry leaders alike to confront a new reality. The counterstrike was a vivid demonstration that no industry was immune to the pressures of a rapidly changing global environment, and that the actions taken by one nation could have far-reaching consequences for the stability of entire economic sectors. In the midst of this high-stakes confrontation, the message was unequivocal. Economic policy was not a static instrument to be wielded at leisure, but a dynamic force capable of reshaping the foundations of national prosperity. The counteroffensive was both a rebuke and a call to action, challenging those who had long assumed that the forces of globalization would remain benign and self-regulating. The strategic implications of targeting such a critical industry were profound, forcing a reckoning with the notion that in an era marked by uncertainty and rapid change, the lines between cooperation and conflict were increasingly blurred. The decision was a reminder that every move on the economic chessboard carried with it the potential to upend established paradigms, compelling all players to adapt or risk being left behind. The scene that emerged from these events was one of intense dynamism and profound transformation. What had begun as a unilateral policy shift was rapidly evolving into a broader contest of wills, one in which economic might was deployed as both shield and sword. The counterstrike was emblematic of a new era in which traditional alliances and established hierarchies were subject to constant reevaluation. It underscored a growing awareness that the power to shape the future was increasingly being concentrated in the hands of those who could harness economic leverage with both precision and resolve. The stakes were immense, and the implications for industries, governments, and individuals alike were nothing short of monumental. The intricacies of this confrontation were layered with complexities that defied simple categorization. The measures implemented were not merely a response to a single policy, but a manifestation of deeper structural shifts that were reshaping the global economic landscape. At a time when the forces of globalization were being re-examined and redefined, the counterstrike served as a stark reminder that the interplay between national interests and global interdependence was fraught with inherent contradictions. The move was both a defensive maneuver and a proactive assertion of economic autonomy, reflecting a belief that the traditional assumptions underpinning international trade were no longer adequate in a rapidly evolving world. In the wake of these dramatic policy shifts, the focus turned to the underlying forces that had brought the industry to this precarious juncture. The auto industry, with its legacy of innovation and resilience, was now confronted with challenges that extended far beyond the mechanics of production. It was a reminder that industries were not isolated entities but were deeply embedded in the fabric of a global economy that was subject to the whims of political ambition and economic strategy. The targeting of such a vital sector was a calculated risk, one that sought to leverage the interconnected nature of modern industry to create a ripple effect that would reverberate across continents and reshape the balance of power. The unfolding events resonated with a sense of inevitability, as if the complexities of international trade had reached a tipping point from which there was no turning back. Every aspect of the confrontation was infused with an energy that belied the traditional methodical pace of economic adjustments. The counterstrike was an assertion that, in the face of aggressive policy moves, there were forces prepared to defend national interests with an intensity that bordered on revolutionary. It was a demonstration that in today's economic environment, every decision carried with it the potential to redefine the boundaries of power and influence. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on China's counterstrike against US auto tariffs? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.